Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. We've had a couple of little technical difficulties so far, but we've got a good run and we'll be all good.
Yeah. Fingers
But yeah,
crossed. Fingers crossed. It's been half an hour of
fingers
setup
crossed.
and hopefully.
Just a little bit of background anyway into Ashley if you don't know him. He currently works at Breville, but he has a rich background mainly in consultancy, industrial design. Well, that all brought him into private practice at one point, and then now it's moved him into working for Breville for what, 10 years. So yeah, so thank you so much for coming on, and it's going to be great to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Roman. Really happy to be here and really happy we sorted out our technical difficulties at the beginning of the call. So hopefully we're stable and good to go. And I'm really happy to be here and happy to contribute.
Awesome. So maybe just to elaborate on what I was saying, do you want to just maybe discuss, your a rough background and maybe talk about the key experiences that really built up who you are today?
Well, that's a really big question. How far back should we go? Like to birth?
Back to the beginning, why not? To birth.
All right. Well, I guess design has always been, part of my life. I was born in Papua New Guinea. I lived there until
really? Wow.
I was in early primary school age. Yep. And then we moved from New Guinea to Canberra, which was a bit of a cold shock, a cold and dry shock from the tropics. And then did my schooling in Canberra. And then throughout my childhood, I was always making things, and my parents really encouraged that. It was very often the case that when I wanted something, they would tell me to make it. They wouldn't buy it for me, so I was constantly making things, pulling things apart. There was one time my mum gave me and my brother like an old cash register and was just like, and some screwdrivers, and was like, here you go. This will be your job for the weekend. Pull it apart and put it back together again. And it turned out that all the fasteners were completely custom, so none of our tools worked and we had to improvise. But that was a fun experience. And then throughout high school, I was very, very into kayaking. And so I was like competitive kayaking, and that I guess really was my first experience in how design benefits a performance outcome. So kayaking is there's very tight constraints on the form and proportion of the boats. Like they have to be within a certain width and a certain length, and they have to weigh a certain amount, and all of these different constraints. We'd fix our own boats, so we had to learn how to work with composite materials like carbon fiber and fiberglass, Kevlar, and things like that. And my coach at the time, she was a very accomplished physicist, and she would often give us like sort of semi lectures about how the fluid dynamics of paddles worked and things like that. So it was all really interesting. But at the time, I didn't really appreciate that was just industrial design. It was just like, oh, that's cool. We can work with kayaks and it's fun, and get our hands dirty playing with composite materials. But I didn't really want to do industrial design. Like I didn't really know it existed. I always liked art. I was really into fine art, mainly sculpture. But through kayaking, I got interested in like the human body, and I wanted to be a physiotherapist. So I was studying all the courses that you needed to do to get you into a physiotherapy degree, because I like the way, bones and ligaments and all that fitted together. And then when I went to look at universities, I walked past one of the design courses, and they had all these toothbrushes and like shavers and things like that just sitting out, like all these little objects. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. What is this all about? And from that, I completely changed what I wanted to do and enrolled in industrial design at the University of Canberra. And it's been a great decision, I think. I can't imagine myself being a physiotherapist. But through university, I wasn't a great student in high school. I guess like a C student, but then at university, because I really, really enjoyed it and was really interested in it, I did really well. So I ended up getting a first-class honours degree. I did a year overseas at the University of Tennessee on exchange, and that was super interesting as well, because I was able to travel to New York to do an internship with a consultancy there. And so even before I finished university, I already had professional experience under my belt, and I'd seen some how different companies operate. And that was a really good experience for me. And then I guess through university, we had our graduate show. We toured around, so we went through Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra, and that was awesome to have all these different people from different consultancies coming in and talking to them and getting exposure to the different people in the industry. And so that was like a really great time, like going through the industrial design education in Canberra. And then I guess after university, because I did really well there, I won a lot of awards, and one of the awards that I won was the Qantas Award, and the prize was a $5,000 cash and $5,000 worth of Qantas flights, and also an internship with Marc Newson in Paris. And so I was like, sweet. And that's when I was working at, so I was already working at the time at Tiller & Tiller, it was called then, before it became Tiller Design. And so I left my job at Tiller & Tiller and went overseas to work for free for Marc Newson. And that was, a really great experience. I mean, I can talk more about that, but probably I should get through the timeline.
No, keep going.
And then from working in Paris, then I went to London and worked for a small consultancy there that was doing a lot of kitchen utensils. And then from London, we moved back to Sydney. I got a job at Design in Surrey Hills, and I was there for about 4 or 5 years. And then from Design, I went to Breville. And here we are, 10 years later, I'm still at Breville. And it's been an amazing experience, just having kind of exposure to all these different organizations, like small and large companies. And I mean, I could go on and on, but I probably should. I'm getting a bit long-winded now.
Lemanouche. In case you haven't heard of them, they're a design organization that helps educate designers all around the world so they can stay up to date with the latest software needs, so that they can be competitive in this overly competitive design landscape. Full disclosure, I was provided this software free of charge to give my honest, unbiased review of the product. Personally, I found this course very beneficial. Before the course started, I had absolutely no knowledge of Rhino. I'd never opened the software before. I went from that to having a good grasp of the fundamental skills of Rhino and moving on to the more complex skills towards the end of my experience with Lemanouche. Currently, I've just passed the first major portion of the course and I've already a solid grasp on the software. The course walks you through the basic tools, then slowly progresses you onto the more complex tool set of Rhino. My only critique would be that the tutorials are using macOS, and personally I use Windows, which initially was somewhat confusing as there are differences between the macOS version of Rhino versus the Windows version. But I contacted the Lemanouche support and they were very helpful and got me back on track, and I haven't had any issues since. In the Rhino course, you will start modelling a basic mock-up pot, then moving on to fully modelling the Nintendo Switch. Next, modelling the Bang & Olufsen Bayo Play speaker, a Google concept, and finally, using the new sub-D tools to model a pair of sunglasses. This comprehensive course is a good step forward in your Rhino learning experience and has given me the tools to work on some key projects that I was looking to move on to once I learned Rhino. Lemanouche also offers a range of other courses for software such as Keyshot, Grasshopper, Photoshop for industrial designers, and much more. If you're interested, check out the affiliate link in the description, and a small portion will go back to me to help fund the podcast and bring it to the next level. Thank you. Now back to the podcast.
You've obviously had exposure to a broad range of companies, working for consultancy, working for large scale organization, and then working even in internships overseas. Like, what experience do you think has been the most beneficial to your progression?
Well, I think having a lot of diverse experience has been really beneficial. I've had the privilege of being inside, a number of different companies that all operate in different ways. The thing that I think has been really beneficial for me personally is just being in Australia. So although Australia doesn't have, as long a history of industrial design as, say, the United States, and because we don't have as many, I guess, opportunities in terms of employment and in terms of skill sets, I think what it forces Australian designers to do is to be really, really skilled in a wide variety of areas. So we're kind of expert generalists. So we need to be able to be able to become an expert quickly. So no matter what challenge you have in front of you, to be able to upskill in that area of competency quickly and be able to apply it to your job. I don't think that's really something that, I mean, I guess I'm not speaking from experience, but what I understand to be true is that Australians have a unique perspective in that broad generalization where we have to be really adaptable. And I found that throughout my entire career, like through consultancies and also within Breville, like this mindset of, if you don't know how to do it, learn how to do it and then apply it quickly and then learn and build on it. We don't really have a culture of becoming a very narrow specialist. We're sort of these T-shaped people that have like a wide variety of expertise, and I guess a lot of subject matter expertise in industrial design, but we're able to talk a lot of different languages in terms of product development. So, electronics or firmware or whatever. But yeah, I think probably if I was going to pinpoint it, I'd say the benefit of being in Australia and having that broad understanding of product development and not being in a pigeonholed kind of, you're a stylist or you're a CAD person or whatever. I think that's been really beneficial. I think we're lucky in Australia that we have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like in some ways, even though you could say that it is the limited design market in Australia is a limitation, like you could look at it that way, but it's interesting you look at it as a positive, because I've sort of seen that in my experience as well. Even in my current role, I came in, they didn't even really know what design is. Like they employed me as a CAD designer basically, but they don't really know what design is. And I'm in there, and I've only been there a couple of months, and I'm already implementing all sorts of things into the business, like implementing Mid-Journey into their workflow, like so they can find images that we can render their products over and things like that. And they like, my boss thinks it's amazing because he's never met people who are exposed to that industry, because he doesn't even really know what design is. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, it's almost, it's the fact that it's so small in Australia is almost a good thing, because whenever we come into a business, we can kind of do so much for all these smaller businesses and have more of an impact, opposed to if they were already well established with a design background.
Exactly. And we find that, when people come into a business in Australia from an overseas background, if they come and they're a really good front end stylist, or they're really good at technical detail, we find that oftentimes it's really limiting to them that they have this very narrow skill set, because at a company like, in a small consultancy or in a large company like Breville, you still need to be really adaptable, and you need to be able to, to mold yourself toward any situation you're faced with, because your projects, right, you're not always going to have the same projects. They're always going to be different. They're going to have different constraints, different challenges, and you need to be able to mold to that. And we find often when people have these, I guess, very specialized skill sets, they don't last very long, because they can't break out of that specialization. I mean, of course, we have, different technical domains, but yeah, still being able to be flexible and knowing that, no one's too good to, pick up a box and pack something up to be shipped out, right? Like everyone has to roll up their sleeves and get dirty. So I think that, that ability to be flexible, and to be interested in things, and to be interested in learning new things and wanting to learn, and have that mindset where you're not an expert and you always have something to learn, is really, really valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Household electronics, did you think you were going to move into that kind of field when you look back at your career, or is that just something that the role opened up and you thought it was an interesting move?
Household electronics, well, even when I was at university, Breville and Sunbeam were talked about a lot. Like they were these two design powerhouses. We don't have that many in-house design-led companies in Australia, so they were always part of the conversation. So always I was thinking that they would be a good option in the future.
Yep.
From working in consultancies for 10 years or so before Breville, I'd always been interested in how it's different from a consulting environment to an environment where you have skin in the game, where you're really, when you're working in a consultancy, you're very like you're a design gun for hire, right? So oftentimes people come in, like I think, and I'm only talking from my experience, right? So people come into a consultancy, they have an idea, they have a technology, they've sort of done their marketing, their marketing beforehand. They know their product market fit, like all that stuff, and then you're doing a design service to get that technology or that invention to market. Whereas in a company like Breville or any in-house design team, the project starts at like, what are we making? Are we going to make a circle or a square? Which market are we going into? Like, what's the type of customer we're trying to please? What's the challenges they face? Like, we start much, much earlier than any job that I had in a consultancy, which was always, I guess, pure industrial design. And so I'd always been interested in how, like, the change from a consulting environment to an in-house design environment. And yeah, the 10 years has just gone by like that. Like, it's been, it's been really, really busy and really, really diverse and interesting. Like, even though you're only working in one sector, in one vertical segment, in a kitchen, on a benchtop, there's so much scope to innovate there. And there's so much competition, which makes it really challenging and exciting as well. So yeah, I mean, when I say I've been at Breville for, over 10 years now, it's gone by so quickly. It doesn't feel like 10 years. It's been, it's been fascinating. And, often at a company like Breville, it's not so much like you don't get, say you're doing a toaster, all right, go make the toaster. And then, all right, what's my next project? All right, you're doing a kettle, go make a kettle. You're constantly thinking about the category. You're thinking about the competitive environment. You're thinking about all the, all the ways you can innovate in that space, like all the different technologies that are coming in all the time that need to be, thoroughly investigated and seen how you can improve them and apply them into our categories. So yeah, it's been really interesting. But yeah, when I first signed up at Breville, I wasn't really thinking 10 years into the future. I was just thinking like, well, this will be fun. And then, 10 years later, I'm like, wow, what a ride.
That's how it happens, bud. It goes quick. Yeah.
And then, I guess, and transitioning from, I guess, being a designer to being a manager has been an interesting transition as well. So I still, like, I guess my identity is still as a designer, but my job and my responsibility is not as a designer anymore. Although the skill set still applies. It's been a really interesting transition over the past 4 or 5 years or so.
Yeah. That was one of my next questions.
Sorry, I'm rambling on a bit, so tell me.
No, that's all right. That was actually
topic.
one of my next questions about design management. So maybe to expand on that, what challenges have you noticed with taking on a more management related role? And do you believe that you find more enjoyment and satisfaction over that opposed to like just a normal design role?
Yeah, sure. It's different, right? And different is good. But I'll give you a bit of an explanation about how we're sort of organized at Breville. So basically we have, like I mentioned before, we are benchtop appliances in a kitchen, right? So it's not built in, it's not hair dryers, it's kitchen benchtop appliances only. And within that space, there's, coffee is a huge part of the business. And then there's everything else. And so I'm in the part of the business that's everything else. I don't work on coffee machines. And predominantly, at least recently, my role has been looking after the, cookers, ovens, microwaves, like those sorts of appliances. And the way we're organized at Breville is it's relatively flat. Like, there's only a few levels. Like, there's the chief, the C-suite, and then there's senior leadership team, and then there's management, and then there's the workforce, right? So there's not that many layers of hierarchy, and within that hierarchy, I guess that construct, there's we're organized in a matrix organization, which means that everyone has two managers. So they have a manager for their technical domain. So that could be electronics or software or firmware or industrial design or mechanical engineering, whatever. And then they have their manager of their work, like the projects they're working on. And so my role is I'm the manager of the project team and the project delivery. And I'm held accountable for only if I really simplify it, I'm only really held accountable for a couple of things. I'm held accountable for 5-star consumer reviews, and I'm held accountable for a high functioning team, and also profit. So there's no use making a product if it's not going to make any money for the business. And then also the project throughput, meaning we have really cool, exciting products, in our roadmap, all ready to go, and they're moving through the delivery phase to market in a nice way. So that's kind of simply like what I'm accountable for. And within my team, so I have a team of about 12 or so people, and they're not all designers. There's a few designers, there's a few mechanical engineers, electronics engineers, quality control engineers. There's firmware. There's a whole suite of technical expertise, and I work in close partnership. Like I have a business partner, so a category manager, and we work very closely together to figure out what we're doing next and how we're going to do it. And then we basically have this awesome team. This is what I love about it. So we have this awesome team that we could do anything. Like with our team of 12 people, we could really, even if it wasn't in Breville, if we were like in a totally different market, totally different consumer base, whatever, we could do anything. And so that just makes me feel really good to have like this awesome team that can just, do whatever challenge is thrown at them and do it really well. And so that's kind of what's good about being a manager, is having a really good team and working to support that team to make sure they're as good as they can be, to make products that are as awesome as they can be.
So maybe just to continue on from there, would you like to discuss the design process of Breville, just to give people an idea of the specific design thinking and the process that each product follows to get to its completion?
At Breville? Yeah, sure. So every project is a bit different. Every project is very different. Typically, we follow a product. We have a fairly formal product development process. I kind of wish I had it in front of me on screen now so I could talk through it. Basically, we start with a discovery phase. What are we trying to do, right? I'm gonna kind of very, very broadly, like broad brushstrokes here. So we do a lot of research. We might start with technology. We might investigate different processes or different methods of doing things in the kitchen. We might start with our customers, learning what they need, the kind of pain they're experiencing, what they would like to be improved. We try and learn about our markets, like what they need, how the different markets are different for each other, which markets have the biggest opportunities. So we do like a lot of discovery, and then we go through and do ideation. And so the ideation, we might go very, very broad. And then we sort of test those ideas and sort of narrow it down a little bit. And then we test those some more. We might go broad again. And we're sort of constantly iterating, right? I'll draw this scribble. That's sort of what it might look like. So it's really, really broad, and we try a lot of different things. And then over time, we get narrower and narrower and narrower until we really know what we're doing. And so we might go through a number of different. And I guess what Breville does is not really any different to, any other organization. Like we're in the innovation business, we're in the design business. The thing that's different about Breville, I guess, is that we operationally we're very strong, and we have really, really smart, really talented people in all of the different technical domains. So we're able to apply that in a way that can put out, really awesome products. But yeah, so typically we go through this ideation phase, then we go through a concept development phase, which typically outputs like a proof of concept, I guess, prototype or number of prototypes. We prototype a lot, and in a lot of varying levels of fidelity, right? So we might be prototyping very, very crude, like very, just using things we find, bits of cardboard, springs, whatever we have lying around, or cutting up different products and sticking them together, or, we start very crude as a way to get, as a stimulus to get feedback from customers or internal stakeholders or our own experts. And then we refine those, we test them again with real people in the real markets, in the real environment they're going to be used, and we learn from that. And then we iterate and we iterate and we iterate. And then we get to a point where we're pretty comfortable, we're pretty confident in this is going to make the business money, we're confident it's going to make customers happy and they're going to want to buy it, like that it's desirable. Really we, like in any sort of R&D enterprise, I guess, you're always trying to balance, desirability, feasibility, and viability. So, desirability from the consumer point of view, like, do they actually want it? Is it something they need? Is it solving some pain that they're experiencing? Technical feasibility, like, can you actually do what you're promising? And then commercial viability, is it going to make the customer money? Is it going to make Breville money? Right. So there's no point in developing a product for 5 years that is a money waster, right? So it always has to have that business lens on it. And then so when we're kind of pretty happy with those three things, then we're sort of ready for tooling. And then, all our products are made in China. Tooling is really expensive, so we want to be pretty sure we're doing the right thing from all of those three different, through all of those three different lenses. And then we kind of go through a fairly typical industrialization process. So, first article, we review it, we modify it, we go through the industrialization process until we get through, till we're ready for mass production. And then it's like, go for it. I think the thing that's really good about the way we do things is the people that are working on that very early discovery phase and the people that are on the factory, like signing off for mass production, are the same people. So we don't have like these sort of handover points to different teams. Like the people at the beginning who are proposing what the product is are the people accountable for delivering it to market. So it means you get this really, this really strong editorial thread throughout the product development. And that at the end of the day, the products at the end really satisfy the design intent. So I think that's a really good thing about Breville, is how you get exposure to that whole process. Like, you're not a designer working on, say, coming up with ideas, or you're not a production person working on, optimizing fixtures on a production line. Like, you're responsible for the whole thing. And that means you get a lot of experience, and you really understand what industrial design and manufacturing is all about. Like, if you understand how a factory operates, if you understand how someone on the production line is going to screw something together, you're going to make really good design decisions at the beginning of the project, right? And that's and that's kind of what design is, right? It's making smart decisions. It's making lots and lots of little decisions every day. And those decisions go together to make bigger decisions. And the decision might be like, is it blue or is it red, or is it a square or a circle? But you're constantly making these choices. And the more experience you have across that whole suite, the whole spectrum of the, idea through to industrialization, the better choices you'll make throughout the phase. So yeah, it's
definitely.
I'm not sure if other large design organizations have the same people working from the beginning to the end, but I think that is what's special about Breville, at least, is that we do that, and we really encourage, designers to be working on the production line, and we encourage manufacturing people or mechanical engineers to be working at the front end as well. So it's really, really collaborative. There's been, examples of, industrial designers and mechanical engineers on the production line, like actually adjusting things with the factory workers to make sure things happen in the way that they should. So yeah, no one's above doing that kind of work. Like, we're really involved in all of the details, and I think it shows in the products at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I've worked in manufacturing mostly so far in my career, and I found it very beneficial because you really get that. I mean, it sounds like similar to at Breville to some degree, but like for example, I'd make a mistake and they'd be right at my door, knocking on the door, coming to complain about the issues, which initially is a bit nerve wracking, especially when you first come out of uni. Like these big like burly welders are coming to harass me about an issue I've made, but it's great because I feel like you learn
Yep.
a lot more, more quickly because you really have to pick up your game to be able to create something. And the other thing as well is the satisfaction because when you actually get to that point where you have a good understanding and then you do a really good, set of technical drawings, they'll come to you and they'll say, oh, that's great. I really could understand what you were saying this time. And, it's a great way to learn to improve
Yeah.
in documentation as well as just improve in general. Yeah.
And knowing that you're going to be accountable for the product,
Mm.
it's not someone else's problem to solve, makes you really think carefully about the way you're putting something together. And nothing's perfect, right? Like there's been many projects that we've worked on that after it's made, you're like, oh, wouldn't it have been good if we did this or did that? And that's kind of just learning for the next time. It's all like a learning experience, and it's all which is why it's a fun profession, right? Because you're constantly learning new things and thinking about better ways to do things. At some point you do have to make a decision and say, look, it's as good as it's going to get. We have to, getting it to market is more important than getting this other little thing right. And so making those trade-off calls between, quality or between speed or whatever. The more experience you have, like the better you are at making those trade-off calls and making them earlier, or anticipating that you might be faced with some kind of difficult situation, in mass production So I think I actually am quite interested to know if how other organizations of Breville sort of size, how they develop products, if it's in a similar way. I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, but at least the way Breville does it is quite, it's quite effective and quite fun as well.
You mentioned that initial ideas can sometimes come from ideas that you guys come up with, or it can be, a similar product to the market or things like that. What is the most common way that you would say, like, you're the product development team, someone comes to you with an idea? Is it generally corporate who come to you with an idea, or is it like marketing, or like, is there another area of the business that comes directly to you, or is it just something you guys will be like, today we're going to design a new toaster, and then you'll just basically go from there? What's the structure on that?
It varies, but I think generally the team is fully accountable for making good products. So, it could come from some R&D activity early on, and they've developed some, there's some interesting way of doing something, and we would then balance that with some other ideas that, like the way the team, I guess, the purpose of the team is to soak up all of this information from all of these different areas, like whether it's external to Breville or internal from different various teams within Breville. And then we have to make these trade-off calls about what are we actually going to do? Like, what is the most, like, where do we want to spend our money? Like, what do we want to invest in? And, going through that process is probably one of the things that I didn't really have exposure to in consulting. Like in consulting, it's usually very clear. Like you have a clear brief from a client who has, I mean, it's not always the case, but generally they sort of know what they want, and you can help them through a design process. But when you're fielding all of these different inputs from all of these different areas with all different, and they're all valuable, right? It's all valuable. And so deciding what is the best thing to be doing against all others, like what's the opportunity cost of doing this? If you do this thing, you're not doing 10 other things, so you better be sure that this thing is the right thing. But yeah, so it's not like, so no one comes to the team and says, here's your project, go and do this. It's like everyone is doing that. Everyone is saying, this is cool things to be doing. And our job in the team is to kind of facilitate that process, and to make sure the best ideas and the most valuable ideas bubble up to the top. And then we can then, pursue those further and see if they have merit or not. But yeah, it's definitely not like people are feeding the team, like, do this, and then we go and do it. It's very, very collaborative, and we have many different ways of trying to decide what the right thing to do is. Everything has there's an opportunity cost with every choice you make, right? So, and yeah, that front end can be very, I guess, it can be really uncomfortable, and maybe it's supposed to be uncomfortable because, when you have all these good ideas, figuring out like which one is the best one is, it's tricky, and it's not clear. There's no like straightforward path. So yeah, it can be if you're the type of person who's really used to clear guidelines or clear instructions, it can be very unsettling. But when you sort of embrace that ambiguity, it's sort of really liberating as well, because you can't, your mindset sort of turns into, we could do anything. Like literally the world is our oyster. Like, what are we going to do? And yeah, so it can be exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a very dynamic process. And I suppose the benefit of being in such a large organization is they have a lot of stake in their products, and they're willing to invest, a fairly significant amount of money to make sure that the product that's developed really lives up to the expectations. And I suppose that, like, whereas what you were saying, like in a consultancy, for example, a lot of consultancy products are, startup products where maybe the investment isn't even that high, and they have to really work with a specific budget that's given. Whereas Breville probably has a bit more budget to, make sure that whatever's created in the end really lives up to expectations. So,
yeah, we still have, it's different. Like I still have a budget that I need to stick to, right? It's definitely not an unlimited budget.
No.
So you need to, we need to figure out like where is the right way to invest that money. Do we invest it in a toaster or a kettle, or do we invest it in, every single person in the team working in one product, or do we invest it in the team working on, each person in the team working on their own products? Like there's so many different ways you can invest that R&D resource, and that's a big part of my job, is like figuring out what to do. But yeah, in a consultancy, like often they are, very early stage, so they're using the design process to get more exposure, or to do a short run of say 100 products to test the market, or maybe they've already got a product and they need some modifications to it. So I think in a consultancy, it's the dream to have clients that are full suite, like from beginning to end, like an entire project, or a range of projects. Like that's the dream for a consultancy. But the reality is most of the clients you have are for a very specific or short part of a project, and sort of in and out, like do this work. And it's very clear cut, because the clients are normally very careful with their with using third party agencies. But there are a lot of clients that are willing to go on that design journey, like through the entire spectrum of product development to launch. And that's, as a consultant, that's the dream, to have those kind of clients. Like they're amazing, but they're not that frequent, I have to say, at least in my experience.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe to move on from that, brand language is obviously a very key part of any successful large-scale organization. How do you guys level brand language? Obviously Breville has specific aesthetic language and even functional language that's been in the products for many, many years. How do you guys leverage that and make sure the products that you create stack up to that long legacy?
Yeah, so Breville has a long history. Most people don't know, but we're an Australian company. We've been around for over 90 years. And, it started off as a lot of, very, very broad suite of products, like radios and shavers and, all different types of things. And then it sort of narrowed down into kitchen appliances. And then over time, that design language has evolved. And we're getting, we have a really awesome design direction team. So they are one of their main accountabilities is to make sure we have consistent design language, and that our brand is recognizable and really desirable for that brand language. And then when you have a lot of Breville products on a shelf, they're all sort of consistent. You can see they're all part of the same family. And so I guess that's a constraint for the team to have to work within. So we can't go around and design like a bright purple blob shaped thing, because that's not on brand. So we do have to work within design guidelines. But luckily, they're getting more and more clear. But still, it's not a cookie cutter approach. Like, it's not just like you can press, apply the Breville design language button and it's done, right? It's a conversation and it's an evolution. But there are the guidelines are generally very clear. Like, if you look at the new Breville products, you can see certain elements that tie them all together. Like, there's a polished stainless steel trim along the bottom. It's all the consistent height. So that when they're all lined up, they're all uniform. They it's designed to accept color, so it looks really good in stainless steel or with a range of colors. The colors are all very carefully and thoughtfully chosen. So there is, when you work for a brand, there is a very clear brand language, and at least in Breville, it's very purposeful. We've sort of gone through an evolution, and where it is now is getting, for a designer, for a design team, it's getting easier to work within those design boundaries. Like, we know what the kinds of things we need to do to make it on brand, and it's not ambiguous. Like, it's very easy to understand, like, what you have to do. But over time, in 10 years time, in 20 years time, 30 years time, like, I'm sure the brand language will evolve, right? But at the moment, it's pretty clear, and we just work within those constraints, and the design direction team is awesome. So we have full faith that in what they're doing. So
okay. You mentioned the fact that everything's manufactured in China. Obviously, that's just a reality, really, especially with the scale of products that Breville makes. But do you think that that's something that maybe will change in the future? Maybe they offer more custom products that will lend itself more to the Australian market, or do you think that it's going to stay in overseas?
I think, well, China's like, I travel a lot to China. Like, I go, multiple times a year. I'm sort of like a FIFO worker in China. It hasn't been that much. I've only been back once since lockdowns ended, so I'm not traveling as much as I used to. But there was a time where I was going up every second week, it felt like. And when you see the way that their government prioritizes manufacturing, and the way they can organize, because it's such a because they have such a strong government, they can just do whatever they need to do to for example, like, factories will just have to move. They're like, oh, by the way, we're not going to be here in 3 months. We have to move our entire factory because this area is now for something else. Or, we have to bulldoze this factory because a power plant has to go up, or, giant highways are going through. So, like, the whole supply chain, the whole way that things are organized there, like Australia, probably for the right reasons, just can't do that. Like, we would, we just can't move at that sort of speed and scale. And also previous governments, like, I don't want to get all political on this podcast or whatever, but previous governments deprioritized manufacturing in Australia. So I think now we're starting to build back up again. We really, with the loss of the car manufacturing industry and a whole lot of other sectors, it's been like, that was a big shame. But now we're, there was an announcement recently about, building back better, or I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, they're investing more in Australian manufacturing, and especially, or sovereign capability. That's the phrase they're using. So it is coming back, but I think it's going to be in much more specialized areas. For this kind of stuff that, for kitchen appliances, I think it'll be a long time, and a lot of really tricky decisions would have to be made to bring that into Australia at the scale that it needs to. But for certainly for rapid prototyping, or for specialized components, or different industries, I think I hope that we do start making more in Australia. But yeah, definitely there's probably more happening in Australia than you realize, especially in the defense space. There's a lot of sort of manufacturers that you don't really hear about, that are doing all kinds of really cool things, like expensive things, but really cool things. But for a company like Breville, yeah, we just don't. They just don't have the scale at the moment. But certainly for prototyping and things like that, we can do those locally. And we have a workshop, and we have 3D printers and CNC and all that sort of capability in our studio. But yeah, I would personally love for manufacturing to come back to Australia in a way that's competitive. And I think we're on the right track. But yeah, watch this space, I guess.
Yeah. I think you're right on the fact that we're not going to be able to beat China in terms of like rapid production. Like for something like what Breville needs to be able to produce at that scale, we're never going to be able to beat China anytime soon anyway. But specifically focusing on something we're good at, like for example, the business I work for, I work in Sunny Coast and they do all the custom works. So we make everything in China and I think India as well. But then anything that's custom, we produce straight out of Kunda Park in Sunny Coast. So like any of the products, because we work with Bunnings closely. So anything that specifically needs to, like someone wants to order a custom size or a custom color or anything like that, we have all the production capabilities set up for that. And I suppose focusing on something like that for a lot of companies, if they want to offer a custom product using Australia for their faster lead times opposed to, and smaller runs opposed to manufacturing overseas, maybe will be the way to go in the future.
Yeah. No, I think I have noticed it is changing as well. Like I think it's slowly coming back, but yeah, it'll be a long time, if ever, that we can compete on the scale. I think there's also a mindset of just with the factories overseas, they'll just figure out how to do stuff. It's like, oh, we don't have that kind of machinery in house. All right, we'll just buy 5 of them and just see how it goes. Or there's just this kind of really kind of aggressive R&D mentality, which can be really helpful. And just everything being close, like that whole area, the Shenzhen area or Pearl River megacity, as it's sometimes called. It's just everything is close. So if you need a particular supplier of a particular component or whatever, you can just get in the car within an hour, or sometimes within at least less than 3 hours. You can get somewhere, look at that factory that's making that component. It's so connected that it's hard to imagine something like that happening in Australia.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even the scale they're building, China's manufacturing processes at. Like I was talking to my operations manager about this, and he said he went to China in like early 2000s. And when he first arrived at the airport, he was going to the factory where everything was being produced. And he said just driving through there was just farms. Like there's just nothing there. And then like every now and again, there'd be like a slight city. And then eventually there was a massive city. And then like a couple of years later, he went back again, and then just driving, there's just no farms anymore. It's just all cities everywhere you go. And like every time you go back, it just get more and more intense to the point where like they just have airports at all the places that he needed to go, and he wouldn't even have to drive anywhere. So it's just crazy the scale they're building it up.
It's really impressive. Like I heard a stat that was something like in the last 2 years, South China has used more concrete than America in its entire history. So it's wild. It's
crazy.
Really,
yeah.
It's beyond comprehension, really.
Maybe to move on from there, you were talking about collaboration with different processes, like different, like as you said, like mechanical engineers and obviously industrial designers and various other fields. What strategies do you use when interacting with these different fields to make sure that you can effectively manage the team, as well as when you were a designer, being sure that you could effectively collaborate in that environment?
Yeah, we work really hard on high functioning squad or team culture. So we really, it's a really big priority for our organization to have these high functioning teams. And that means, everyone, and it's sort of like, you can think about it like a sports team, right? It's not a family. It's a sports team. Everyone has a role to play and everyone has to perform at a really high level. And that way you can, win games or whatever. So we work really hard on that. Part of organizing within these teams, with a manager like myself, being accountable for that, has really helped that, because everyone sort of has a home. Like your home is that team, and that team is really autonomous. We have a really strong purpose and vision. Like we all agree on what we're going to work on, and we all believe in the vision. And also even with it, so that's like, I guess that's the project team, but then we also have everyone has their own technical domain team as well. So all the industrial designers are part of the industrial design technical domain, and so they have that team as well. And so one aspect, like the domain team, is building up the technical competency, making sure people are really skilled, they have the tools they need to do their jobs really well. And then the other team is around applying those skills to the project. And so we have a very, I guess, a pretty structured operating rhythm. So within our team, we have different, like within my team, we have different projects going on that don't all use the same people, but we try really hard to have this regular rhythm of like, what are you working on? Okay, let's plan what we're doing. Let's do it. At the end, we'll present what we're doing. We evaluate it, and we move on, and we just keep following this kind of regular rhythm. And that really helps to sort of center everyone and to make sure that you're working, like you're all pushing in the same direction. You don't have, I guess, conflicting priorities, or someone has a different idea about what the product is. Like it really helps to get alignment within the team. But that's within the team, right? Outside of the team, there's a whole lot of other people that are really important to the project as well. And so they're still part of the team, but I guess they're, they all play different roles. Like marketing, for example, is different. Like they have a different job to do in terms of go to market than the product development team, but it's really important we collaborate frequently. And normally we have, rather than having everyone collaborating with everyone at all times, we have certain people whose job it is to manage that relationship, right? So all the information from, say, one area, like let's say, the marketing go-to-market team, they would then feed all that through a certain point. So it's sort of one single point of truth, and then that can then disperse through the team, and then we can react to it and whatnot. So we have this like really autonomous core team, and then all these different people, and we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different people all over the world with all different kinds of important skills. Maybe they're in the retail space or whatever, but that has to come back into the team somehow, and what the team's doing has to go out to them and come back again, sort of like this pulse. And yeah, so, but you can't, it wouldn't be effective if everyone was just constantly like going off and, doing everything like that. You sort of need to have this centered, I guess, focus of work. Otherwise it would just be a mess, and everything would be like going off in all kinds of crazy directions. So yeah, I think having this like autonomous team is like a really powerful, I guess, mindset. We have a lot of, I guess, there's the technical work, but then we try really hard to focus on the team culture as well. So, how do we address interpersonal issues, and how do we increase our team effectiveness going forward? So we have, we regularly reflect on how we're working, how our team could be, improving into the future. Like what sort of things could we do to make us more high performing or happier or more autonomous, or things that aren't directly related to the project. Because in the long run, the idea is our team just gets better and better and better until we're, constant improvement, I guess, is the catchphrase.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it sounds like a good strategy. I mean, they're successful, so it's working.
Hasn't always been like this. Like
maybe
this
just
is
it's changed recently.
It's been a very,
what's changed over?
It's been a very purposeful effort to focus on this as a way to make better products and have better teams. So it's been multiple years in the making of focusing on I guess, team culture and the ways of working. Especially going from Breville was a relatively small, medium-sized company, and we had a rapid expansion of people. And we had to organize ourselves in a way that could scale. So we had to organize our processes and the way we operate to scale with the vision of our CEO. So we had to sort of change the way we did things a little bit, and having these autonomous teams has been part of that. It's been good.
Okay. Yeah. We discussed this earlier, briefly before starting the podcast. You mentioned that you are currently living out of Sydney and working hybrid.
Yeah.
So I actually I live in a rural area as well. I lived in Brisbane, and then I decided to move and put life in front of me. And now I live in the Sunshine Coast, up in the mountains in rural Sunshine Coast. So I drive an hour to work, which I'm happy with that. I'm luckily found a job that's about an hour from my house. But long term, my future prospects are probably going to be more hybrid or remote even. So I'd be interesting to get your perspective on how that work environment has been, and the positives and maybe even the negatives that you've noticed, and would you recommend?
No, it's a really interesting topic. It's kind of the topic of the season, really. Everyone is now kind of figuring out the right way to organize a workplace, and particularly a design workplace. So my personal story is during the first lockdowns, we escaped Sydney because as soon as the playground started shutting, we're like, oh shit, it's getting real. And so luckily we had a place. My wife's family has a shack in the mountains, in the snowy mountains. So we bugged out. We just filled up the car and we just drove out as fast as we could. And we stayed up in the mountains for 12 weeks or so, living off the land. I mean, not really. We had shops and whatnot, but it was pretty rustic. The house is pretty rickety. And then after that first lockdown ended, we came back to Sydney. And then when the second lockdown started happening, we're like, okay, now we've got to think a bit more seriously about this, because homeschooling really sucks. So we came to Canberra, which is where both of my wife's family and my family live, and so we put the kids in school in Canberra, and they, and that means we only had to homeschool for we homeschooled for a lot, but we had enough time where they were in the local school in Canberra that meant we had a much better experience than if we'd stayed in Sydney. And then when all the lockdowns and stuff finished, we just stayed here. And so, the kids are really happy here. My wife she's retraining. She's doing her master's degree here as well. So we're pretty put. And fortunately, Breville has has flexible work arrangements. So the condition is that I'm on site 3 days a week. And so luckily, we managed to keep our apartment in Sydney, and I also luckily rented to a friend so I can stay with him whenever I come to town. So he gets cheap rent, and I get a guaranteed bed whenever I need to be in town. So because of all those things, it works. Sounds right?
Pretty good.
3 days a week on site, a place to stay, back and forwards. It's it's not normal, but it's it's working. So yeah. Luckily,
how far is the drive from Canberra to Sydney?
With the new tunnel, it's if traffic's good, 2 hours 45.
That's not bad.
If traffic's bad,
okay.
It can be if traffic's bad, it can be 3.5 hours. So if there's an accident or something, but the new as controversial as they were, the new tunnels actually have saved a lot of time for me.
Yeah, I found that when I moved, I bought this house, and then I still had a job in Brisbane, and I was driving back and forward, and it was terrible. My best was about an hour and 30, but usually it was about 2.5 hours, every day, each way, depending on it really depended, but it just was too unpredictable. That's the problem. If I could be it's definitely going to take this long every day, I feel like I could have done it, but it's just some day I'd be an hour and 20 minutes. Some days I'd be there for almost 3 hours. And yeah. But no, it is hard because I feel like especially moving into what was that?
Oh, sorry, go on. No, you go.
I was just saying, I feel like especially when you move through uni and you do uni in a city, it seems like you're just throwing your career away to move away from the city. And unfortunately, with industrial design, like that's where the jobs are, especially. But I hope that in the coming years, like I've made the jump towards it, and so far I feel like it's given me a happier, outlook on life. And I think that in the coming years, more jobs will be moving towards that, and probably more opportunities will open up outside the city.
Yeah, I think there are things happening in rural areas. Like some people that I went to uni with. They started a water company called Meat Pat, and that's based in, I think they manufacture in Albury. So they're because they're manufacturing in Albury, it means that they have all the support of the regional all the regional councils and governments and things. So I think that it's actually been really good for them to be in a regional area. So yeah, things are, there are, over time, more and more opportunities will show up in regional areas. I think industrial design, though, it's always going to be where the industry is. There's no escaping that. Even though you can get stuff made in China or whatever, being close to some form of industry is always, going to be a bit more of a link than it is, say, with graphic design or the other disciplines like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was lucky. I live about an hour from the Sunshine Coast, and it's one of those areas, the Sunshine Coast, where I feel like in the coming years it's really, really expanding, especially Caloundra and Maroochydore. I work in Maroochydore, and the industry there is crazy. Like the Bunnings they have there is the number one Bunnings in Australia for profit.
Wow.
And I think it's the number two overall. Number one's actually in New Zealand, which is interesting. But yeah, basically like the whole area is just expanding. Like the shopping center's all brand new, and like sky rises are popping up everywhere. And I think it's because Brisbane City is the biggest major city near here, but it's become terrible with public transport and a range of different issues. People have started to move away from the city, which has built like almost like mini cities on either side in Gold Coast and in the Sunshine Coast. So I'm excited to see where industry is going to move in the future. Like there's a whole range of manufacturing processes already out this way, and yeah, definitely in the coming years it's probably going to grow even more.
There's the rocket company. I read about that the other day. What are they? Can't remember their name now. Star something. They're making rocket. They're like a SpaceX competitor based in Queensland.
Okay, there you go.
Making rocket ships out there.
It's all
commercial rocket ships. Yeah,
it's all happening. You've answered so many of my questions just from you just chatting about things. You're hitting all the targets.
I could go on. I could go on and on. Yeah, I'm on a roll now. Now the internet's more stable. Take advantage of it.
Yeah. So your career's obviously taken a few turns. Like you've started off, good foundation at university, and you moved on to consultancy, and then into your own personal work, and then into in-house. What do you think's the next chapter of your career? Like, where do you think that far ahead, or do you just kind of take things as they come?
I haven't been that strategic, probably to my detriment. So normally when I see an opportunity that's interesting, I just see where it goes, right? So with Breville, it was the same sort of thing. I was like, oh, this seems like an interesting opportunity. Let's see where it goes. And then over 10 years later, I'm still there. So, within Breville, so we're working on, I've been working on a roadmap of products with the team. And, we have a roadmap of products for the next 10 years or so. Like we're thinking that far ahead.
Well,
and it's, the technology is getting more and more sophisticated, right? So we're doing some really cool things. Like a few years ago, we developed an oven that was, connected to the internet. That was a huge learning curve for us, but that sort of stuff is becoming much more, it's much more accessible now. Now that we've done it once, we can do it again. Like we know what's required. At that time, we probably didn't know what was required. We bit off more than we could chew. And that was a huge learning curve to figure out like how to work with different types of like development processes to go from like a traditional product to a product that's connected. But then like thinking long term, like that sort of stuff is going to get more and more. We're going to get more of it, right? And it's going to become more and more sophisticated, and rich user interfaces and more sophisticated cooking technology and more sophisticated coffee technology and different inventions. And so we're constantly looking at the future. It doesn't always mean that those really ambitious futuristic projects turn into products. Like often we do a lot of R&D activity and it never materializes in something that the consumer gets, but it's really important nonetheless because it helps us kind of pave the way for our future, our future roadmaps. So thinking, for me long term, like, Breville's an amazing company. I'm really excited to see, where it goes next. I think our leadership team is, I'm not trying to be a suck up here, but we have an awesome CEO. He's putting more and more money into R&D.
Do you get endorsed by Breville for promotion on podcasts?
Well, I didn't actually tell anyone I was doing this, so hopefully they're okay with it. I haven't spilt the beans too much, so I'm sure it'll be all right. But yeah, no,
the trade secrets, the secret to designing household equipment.
Yeah. No, but our leadership team is really good. So we're in a really strong position to make more and more really valuable products for people. And it doesn't mean every product is a flagship. It doesn't mean every product is the best and the most expensive. It just means that the type of person who wants X is going to get the best X they can get. It's, and that's, I guess, got its own unique challenges. Like designing the product with all the bells and whistles is sort of easier in a way because you can put more into it. But when you're really trying to trim it back to what is the thing that satisfies the most people at that price point, with these requirements, blah, 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 like that is, when you get that right, it's, it's really rewarding, like both for Breville, and it's really rewarding that you've done something that can reach a lot of people and makes their lives a lot better. So yeah, there's definitely, there's a lot happening. Breville, I really believe is doing all the right things in terms of, R&D and the way we support product development. I think, I believe the team, at least my team feels like they have what they need to do the best jobs that they can. And I feel like the projects we're working on are really exciting. The ones just around the corner and the ones, longer term horizon are all really exciting. And then, I'm doing outside of Breville, I'm doing a little bit more, I guess, for myself. Like I have a few little pet projects that I'm working on at home and whatnot. One of them is not really a design project, but I've kind of gone through we're living in a real fixer-upper house. So
me too.
Really,
me too.
It's been, I get to flex my design and problem-solving muscles with our kind of challenging living arrangement. We just knocked a wall out and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of going to keep us busy for a while, like just improving, polishing mud. But yeah, it's
it's satisfying. I feel like it is very important as a designer to have outside projects outside of their career. Like I found it, I'm always trying to find some new project to do at home in my spare time. Like I designed my engagement ring and wedding ring and stuff like that because I'm getting married this year, and a whole bunch of different bits and pieces. Like for example, I designed a podcast logo to go on the wall that's illuminated, but I haven't had time to put it up yet. But just like bits and pieces like that, you know what I mean? Like little projects here and there. And because I feel like sometimes when you're at work, you can get pigeonholed into the specific needs of that job. But just having complete creative freedom, there's no constraints. There's no one to tell you it's a crazy idea because you're the one paving ahead on that trip. I think it's really important to have outside projects. Yeah,
it's a really good point you raise. Like there's been just thinking about people that I've worked with in the past or continue to work with, and other colleagues and people that I know outside of Breville, and often they like, oh, I wish I had more time. I wish I could learn this skill or whatever. And it's like, well, what's stopping you? Just go and do it.
Yeah,
like I really want to learn this software, this computer software. I really want to learn how to use this new modeling program or this new rendering program or whatnot. It's like, just like, what's stopping you? Just do it. you can do it at work, and you can go home and you can do it while you're watching TV. Like, there's literally just go and do it. Last
Yep.
year I turned 40, and I had one of my birthday presents was to go and make some hand forged knives at a foundry in Canberra.
I do
Valley
blacksmithing.
Forged. Yeah, it's awesome. I loved it. I've never done it before, and it was
so much fun.
It was like a really good way to be back on the tools, like in the real tools, like just hammer and anvil. And at the end of it, you get to have something that's really awesome, and you can use, like those chef knives I made. I'm using them every day. Like, they're my favorite knives, and because I've made them, and because I designed them, and I physically was like putting them in the fire. They have like a huge amount of value to me that I wouldn't have if I had bought them. So I think it's really, really important to be constantly, exercising those muscles outside of your job, and in as broad a range of fields as possible. I think, one of the guys at work, he, he's a design manager, and he went and did his machining course. So he's been, learning how to be a machinist in his spare time, which is awesome. Like, he's a manager, but he's going to be a machinist as well. So now he has that, now he has that skill to add to his repertoire. So I think it's just really, really, it's crucial to be, to have a lot of irons in the fire, to use the blacksmithing metaphor. To be, just like broaden your skill set. Even if it's not particularly design related, I think just being out there learning new things. It's super, super important, and it's rewarding as well.
Yeah,
it's really rewarding.
It's the classic thing. Designers are sponges. It sounds very cliche when you say it out loud, but it's true to some degree. Like, that is our role. We go out to society, we go out to an organization, we sponge up information, and then we, regurgitate it into a solution, basically.
Exactly.
And I suppose in a way, like, I was thinking about it the other day, like the concept of AI, how AI is just compositing. Like, obviously that is just the way we think to some degree as well. We composite information, but I feel like even more so designers are like that. Like, sometimes you'll have an idea and it will seem very, fleshed out almost just from the beginning, but you'll think, where did that come from? And it really, realistically, it's just a composite of previous experiences and previous knowledge that you've had, that you've just, regurgitated into this specific idea. Yeah.
Nothing is new, right? There's no, getting a bit philosophical here, but there's no new ideas, right? Everything, like, you are literally, like, you as a human being are the product of everything that you've experienced, right? You're not, nothing is an original thought. Like, you are just sponging off your environment, and then you get to, maybe if you're lucky, you get to connect two unrelated things together as a new thought, or a new, brilliant idea. But generally, you're absorbing everything around you, and you are just outputting what, your interpretation of the world and your interpretation of how to solve that problem. So I think, the more you're kind of receptive to that, to what the world is offering you, and the more that you're receptive to all these different experiences from all different areas, I think the better designer you'll be, because you'll be able to draw on that inspiration and connect the dots that maybe other people can't see, and then come up with a great solution. Got a bit philosophical there for a moment.
That's awesome. No, that's the way to be. We might wrap it up soon. It's getting.
Just to mention, because you mentioned AI before. That's something that I do feel that I'm a little bit behind the times on, because I can see it's very seductive, right? What it's capable of. And I haven't used it. I don't know if you've used it a lot, but I haven't been able to use it in a way that's, I guess, usable yet. So in terms of the text prompts, the GPT sort of things, like that's very useful as an alternative to Google or whatever. But so far, I haven't really had a lot of inspiration, or I haven't had a lot of good experiences with the design tools. And I know they're there, and I know they're really seductive, and they look visually spectacular, but I haven't seen anyone show me something that's like usable yet. It's pretty images with not much. I don't know. Like, so I feel like that's an area that I should upskill in. Maybe that can be my next adventure, is learning more about AI design tools. Yeah, that's. I
I've
don't know. Is that something that
I've
you're
had a
using a
little
lot?
bit of yeah, I've had a little bit of exposure weirdly. Like I graduated relatively recently, so like AI was just coming in at the end of my degree. I think it was like pretty much DALL-E was no, was it? No, I think yeah, ChatGPT was released basically when I graduated, so I didn't get that, but that was like kind of the beginning of the design tools, and since then it's just accelerated insanely. But at my job actually, I came in and they'd never really knew anything about design tools, and I realized that there was actually a need for implementation of AI, and I never implemented in any workflow before, so I thought, now's the time. So for example, like they wanted me to, because I came in as a designer, but at the moment I'm doing more rendering because they basically just want to render all the products they have on offer because the company they have overseas to do it are just too slow. So I've started doing it for them. But they wanted to have original images for backdrops for their products and things like that. So I started implementing Midjourney, and then I use like Photoshop AI to adjust the Midjourney images to fix some of the weird like AI problems they have. Like sometimes they'll just be like especially with houses, their houses are hilarious. Like it'll be like, oh, this guy's got a couch on his balcony, or like he's got no front door, and you can just like see into his living room, like weird shit like that. It's so good. But yeah, just like implementing stuff like that, and then basically implemented it completely into the process where I will, find an image in Midjourney, use AI and Photoshop to adjust it, and then like render the product in using Blender, and then basically just like streamline the whole process that way. And my workplace is really interesting. Really enjoyed it. Like my boss is basically, I joke that he's quit his job to basically just do AI imaging now, because he'll just be there like, look at my new images I've come up with, like look at all these variations I've got, and he loves it. Yeah.
Did you see? Did you see the Nike? Was it the Nike AI shoes that they made?
No.
They made a suite of I think it was Nike made a range of shoes. And they actually made the shoes. Some of them are pretty kooky, but some are, you can squint your eyes, you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I definitely think it's sort of like we're looking at the first steam engine, I think. It's like, it's exciting,
Yeah,
but imagine, what happened from the steam engine, like it's going to be psycho what happens in the next few years. Yeah, I think that's something that I feel a little bit behind the times on.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things where it's at that initial stage where you can continue in the processes that you're used to, and it's not really going to affect your job too much. But I think in the coming years, if you don't upskill and get used to the processes as they develop, I suppose you lose some sort of competitive edge at that point. But I don't think it's at that point yet. I don't think right now, like someone of your experience is going to be, not as good as someone else because they know how to use AI. I don't think it's at that point at all. So.
I don't think there's going to be a substitute for human, I guess, human curatorship, right? You may get 50 amazing images, but then at some point you have to choose like which one of those images has potential to be a product or potential to be an inspiration for a product. But you still need to have that, that curatorial insight that, yeah. I don't think we'll ever miss the human element. I think, I don't know. It is going to be really exciting. Like I'm really, really interested to see what happens next. I suspect it'll just be like it doesn't change what we're doing. It just makes us a lot more productive. I think the expectation, there'll be like a lot, if you're not using those tools, you'll be left behind because the productivity of people that are using those tools will be so far ahead. So I think that's probably, something we might see. Even now, like I'm just finding the productivity gains that I've had from using, like a Copilot or something instead of Google. So I could just I'll just search in Copilot and it'll tell me what I want to know. I don't have to look through like 50 websites to find that information. So just access to information, if you trust it, if you trust the information it's giving you, like the speed in which you get it, I think is like that's been a productivity gain for sure. So yeah, on the design tools, I reckon it's probably the same, but you'll still need a human there to, to make those curatorial choices.
To direct it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something that we haven't actually discussed much on the podcast, yet, because I feel like when the podcast stopped for a bit, I feel like before it wasn't as prominent, is obviously Neuralink. So Neuralink, I feel like, is one of those really weird things where it wasn't really that big until recently. Like, have you heard about what's happened, in the last month or so, where the first successful human trial was carried out?
Yeah, implanted it in a human.
Yeah. And that guy, and he now is like playing Civilization video games. I watched the video and like he's I think quadriplegic, and now he's like he had a lot of problems with hand movements, and now he's playing like full Civilization video games for like 8 hours straight, just with his mind. And before, he had to use this thing in his mouth where he could like kind of use different levels of pressure to play the game. And he said it was terrible. Like he couldn't play a game.
Yeah.
So obviously there's the medical application there, but I had this argument with a guy at work the other day about this, where he was saying that he would get the brain chip because he feels like it would come to a point where he would be lost in his career and become surpassed by someone who had it. What is your perspective on that? Do you think at that point we're losing connection to humanity and it's a worthy loss of job? Or do you think that it is a necessary evil in the coming years?
In terms, you're talking about brain implants specifically?
Yeah, like as in let me express this question a little bit more clearly. Like basically, as brain chips become more popular and more integral in life, if it became a moment where it gave you an edge over your competitor in your workplace, would you see it as something that's worthwhile, or do you still think that we're losing a level of humanity from it?
Yeah. I mean, when you, I guess you could compare it to those, the Apple goggles, right? Are they, people that wear those, are they sort of becoming less human? I mean, you could argue, yes, they're more removed from, they're more removed from like direct human experience. So there's this something in between them and the real world. So in that respect, I guess you could say they're becoming removed, losing some humanity. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question to ponder. Yeah, maybe. I think that's such it's so early that I think
it's one of those things where like even AI, when it first came out, you wouldn't be able to conceptualize where it is today. And I feel like Neuralink is at that point where it's so early stage now that it's hard to even perceive what a few years away could hold.
Yeah, I really think it's like we're looking at the first printing press, or we're looking at the first steam engine or something. Like it's so early that we just have no idea what's in store for us. But I think it's exciting. I'm going to choose to remain positive about it. Like I welcome our new overlords.
I'm just thinking in my mind, like mind features, like you're like doing a sweep in your mind. I don't know, like filleting this object in your mind. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe you just mind think about it.
That's crazy.
Because I often
would there even be CAD, or would it just be like visualization? Yeah.
Like when I'm designing stuff, like often, I actually like to think about stuff a lot before I even put pen to paper. So, because I'm driving a lot between Canberra and Sydney these days, like those moments of, a few hours of just, you're not doing anything apart from driving, it's sort of meditative. And I've actually found that in those moments of peace, right, even though it's hard to think of driving as peace, but, you're just driving, I'm actually can visualize and develop a solution in my mind and go through like a number of iterations. And by the time I get home, I can sketch it out and be like, oh yeah, it works. But you kind of go through those iterations as thoughts. And so maybe that could be something where, those thoughts are, become visible on the screen. And because when you're thinking like of a product solution, you're not thinking like I'm going to do a sweep or an extrude or I'm going to cut this like that. You're sort of thinking about how things sort of fit together, and it's a bit more fluid. And
if you're disconnected from the processes to create, then I feel like you wouldn't necessarily think of, I don't know, like specific aesthetic features. You would just think of the product as it is and it would be created. So it's a completely different way of creating as well when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like the way
Yeah,
you would sketch. I feel like it's closer to the way you would sketch opposed to the closer to the way you'd model. Because when you sketch, you just immediately sketch an idea, and that's the idea as it is in your mind. But it would almost be more like that than it is specific processes to create like a final product. Yeah, it's interesting. I never really
Sketching
thought about
is
it that way.
I think sketching will always be there. You know, it was there
Hmm.
when we were living in caves. It'll be there in another 100,000 years. I think it's such an important communication tool. You know, it's like a direct link from your mind to something physical. I think it's something that every designer should practice and constantly get better at, because it's just such a crucial communication tool. You know, you don't need to speak the same language, right? If you travel to a different country like China or whatever, people in the factory often don't speak English, but they can understand a sketch, right? And the faster you can draw a sketch that's legible, that they can interpret, the more effective you'll be. And it's just super, super important. I think everyone, you know, not just designers, I think everyone should be sketching regularly just to kind of exercise that part of their brain. Yeah, I think it's really, I think there's no substitute for the manual tools in that respect.
I really enjoy even just sketching as like a meditative state, which is kind of what you were talking, like sort of what you're talking about before. I just, like, for example, the other day I took my dogs for a walk to this great lookout we have up the road, and I just sat down on a bench and just was sketching with my sketchbook, and you know, no one was there, not talking to anyone, just sketching. And it's, I don't know, there's something really therapeutic around just sitting there in your own like creativity, in your own creativity, you know.
Yeah, you're in the zone. You're in that state of flow. And you're creating something from nothing. You don't need to have a pen and a piece of paper. You could be on the beach writing in sand, like, you know, communicating ideas, you know, through a visual medium. You can be anywhere. Like, that's why everyone always talks about napkin sketches. It's because at that time you have a napkin, you have something to scribble with, and you can get an idea out. And often it's what's needed, you know, just to be able to make that idea physical. Yeah, there's been times I remember doing it when I was at a factory once. There was nothing around. I had to scratch on a bit of I used, you know, I probably shouldn't, you know, admit to this, but I use the verniers because they're sharp, and I use the vernier calipers to like scratch like what I meant, like on a piece of scrap, and I was like, that's what I mean. Yeah, so I think whatever object, whatever blunt object you have at your disposal is enough to get, you know, to make that idea real in a way that someone else can interpret it. Yeah, super important. I think
I think sketching is one of those skills where manual skills, yeah, sketching's one of those things where I feel like it's not going to be lost in, like, if any designer is thinking about what skill they should focus on, that isn't going to be lost in the coming years by, you know, taken by AI. Like, I feel like in the coming years, having great skill in CAD is going to be pretty limited. Like, especially as we are able to visualize 3D models in AI, you know, but whereas, like, I suppose product development skills as well as just sketching in general is going to be something that I don't think ever is going to be gone. Yeah.
A sketch and a nice rendering and a nice CAD model, you know, at some point as an industrial designer, that has to be a real product, right? And if you don't understand the real product and how the product gets put together and how people on a production line use tools to make it and how machines make the shapes like that, you know, until we're just 3D printing every single possible component, which, you know, there probably is a future where we are doing that. Like, that's that's sort of where to start. It's like, once you understand those basic principles of, like, how do you make a piece of metal, or how do you make a piece of plastic in that shape, only then you can apply that to, like, how do you then solve a problem using that process or that technique to develop a physical solution to a problem.
Yeah, I think soft skills and general knowledge. I feel like soft skills and general knowledge is also going to be one of those things where that's like where people really are going to invest their time in the future, because that's the kind of knowledge and soft skills are the things that you can really translate into any technological innovation. You know, whereas like one specific skill in one specific software isn't going to be able to translate and scale into like the AI realm.
Yeah. Totally. I think just having those Yes, I mean, it's an exciting future ahead of us, right? As designers, it's yeah, I think it'll always have this mix of the intangible and the tangible, and the better you can walk that tightrope between the two, the more effective you'll be as a designer. But I think manual skills in general is something that's really, is often overlooked in design education. Like people, they learn CAD, they learn how to create images, they learn how to communicate ideas and whatnot, but knowing how a screw interacts with a a product is that's pretty fundamental, right? And you only really understand a screw and when you've actually used a screwdriver, when you've actually put a product together by hand, when you've disassembled or reassembled something. That's how, when you know what's required, that's how you can make good choices to develop good products.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. We might leave it there, and we've worked through these few technological issues, and I feel like it was great.
I hope it actually stitches together at the end, because there was a few big breaks.
That's all right. I'll do some fancy editing, some clipping, and I'm sure we'll be fine.
Yeah, it took us a while to get into the flow, but we got there eventually. So maybe everyone can just fast forward the first 20 minutes or so.
No, thank you so much for coming on anyway. And yeah, it's great to have some people like you come out and chat on the podcast to share your experiences with students and professionals out there. And yeah, I'll be glad to have you on again.
Thanks. It's been really fun, Roman. I've really enjoyed talking to you. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much. See you later.
All right. Cheers, mate. Bye.